Okay, you're good.
Okay. So, hello everyone. Thank you all for joining. We're super excited to have India Henry today with the speaker topic of forensic science. So, India Henry is a professional at DNA Mavericks Forensic Science. And with that, I'll hand it over to India to begin her presentation.
Hope everyone can hear me and see the presentation. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so good morning, or depending on where you are, good afternoon. My name is India, and I am a forensic DNA expert with DNA Mavens Forensic Services. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about forensic science and then my particular specialty, forensic DNA analysis. So the screen shows all the things that got me interested in forensic science. Um, you may be too young for some of these, but a lot of these shows are responsible and books were responsible for bringing forensic science to the mainstream. And they really gauged my interest. And ever since then, all I really wanted to do was be a forensic analyst. This is my career journey. So I graduated from high school in 2002. I'm from Houston, and I graduated from Baylor University with a bachelor's in forensic science. I was also pre-med and I minored in chemistry, and that will become important later on in the presentation. I started in 2010 as a forensic or a criminalist with the Houston Police Department Crime Lab. And then in 2014, they had a change of management, a change of name, and we became the Houston Forensic Science Center. I left the Houston Forensic Science Center in 2022, and then two big things happened later in 2022. I started my MBA journey and I co-founded DNA Mavens Forensic Services. And just, I like y'all to always throw this tidbit out is that um, your journey is unique to you, and you may have an idea of what you want to do and how you want to start your journey, but things happen in between, and sometimes you have a change of mind or change of heart. So always keep that in mind. Just keep an open mind as you go through your career journey. So to the good stuff. So forensic science. Forensic science is science as it applies to the law. It's using science in legal situations and criminal investigations to help solve crimes and bring closure to families and victims. And it's been around for a very long time. It actually started around 1248 in China. And it started getting a lot of popularity in the late 16th century. And today, forensic science is just as huge. There are a lot of different areas of forensic science. So if you have an interest in something, you can probably find that interest and gain a career in forensic science. So like firearms, drug and alcohol, DNA, digital and multimedia, engineering, anthropology, entomology, which deals with bugs, document analysis, and a forensic sketch artist. So a little bit about DNA. DNA is your hereditary information. It makes you who you are, and it's known as deoxyribonucleic acid. You get half from mom and half from dad, and generally your DNA is unique to you unless you have an identical twin. I say generally because we have not typed or we don't have a DNA profile from everyone in the world. So that's like a general statement. But another interesting fact I like to share is 99% of our DNA is the same between individuals. So if you're sitting next to a stranger somewhere, 99% of your DNA is the same. But there's less than 1% that differs from person to person. And that 1% is what DNA analysts focus on. So just a little fun fact. So how is it used in forensic science? So DNA is a comparative science. So we have to have a known, which is typically like a reference sample from someone that we know where it came from, and an evidence sample, which is an unknown. And we would make a comparison or attempt to make a comparison. And you would generally get three different types of conclusions: inclusion, exclusion, and inconclusive. And I also like to point out that these conclusions are based on the evidence that we receive. So sometimes, and typically this happens a lot, we only have an unknown sample. So we have an evidence sample that we got a DNA profile from, and we can say a single source male DNA profile from a knife, but we don't know who that DNA profile came from because we don't have anything to compare it to. We don't have a reference sample. So all of this depends on the evidence that is received from the investigation. So a little bit about the typical process. So typically a crime occurs and then a request is made by a customer. So it'll be like an officer, an ADA, a district attorney, or a defense attorney. And they're requesting that certain items be tested. So those evidence is sent to the laboratory to be tested. A report is released, and sometimes a trial occurs, not all the time. So when the evidence gets to the lab, the first person it usually gets to is a screener or serologist. This person is responsible for testing the evidence for biological fluids, such as like blood and saliva. Sometimes they may swap the item for potential contact DNA. Sometimes they'll collect trace evidence, such as hairs, fibers, glass, things like that. They are like the first person who has contact with the evidence. So this step is very crucial because anything that they do in this step has the potential to affect the downstream process. I started off as a screener serologist, and I think I did this role for maybe 3 or 4 years. But this role does a lot of chemical testing. So you're deciding, is it blood or is it not blood, or potential blood or not potential blood? Is it saliva, things like that. And the results from this testing are sent to the downstream process, which I'll talk about next. So next is the DNA technician. This person is responsible for loading those samples from the screener into the instrumentation to generate data. The DNA process typically involves 4 steps: extraction, quantification, amplification, and separation or detection. So the DNA technician does a lot with robotics and instruments. And instruments do the bulk of the work, but the DNA technician does a lot of sample preparation. So they may have to load reagents to the sample, load reagents on the instrument. They'll do a lot of maintaining the instruments, a lot of things like that. The DNA technician is responsible for. That's usually the next step from a screener. And I think I did a technician role for about 2 years before going on to the next role in the forensic DNA analyst process. And these are real instruments here that are used in the laboratories. Different laboratories have different instruments and different processes, so it will vary, but these are 3 very common instruments that are used in the laboratory. And my last role, and typically it's just like the most senior role in the forensic DNA section, is the DNA report writer and DNA analyst. They are responsible for getting all the information, all that data from screener to DNA technician, and they are the ones who interpret the data and make a conclusion. So when I mentioned earlier about the 3 different types of conclusions, inclusion, exclusion, and conclusive, the DNA report writer or DNA analyst is responsible for making those decisions. And they also apply statistics to show how rare or the occurrence of these DNA profiles in the world. Typically, training for a DNA report writer takes about a year. If you've had the other screening or DNA technician role. But again, it will vary depending on your organization and your background experience to be a DNA analyst. This is an example, as you see on the screen, of electropherogram, which is a graphical representation of the DNA. So basically a DNA profile. And the DNA analyst will look at a known sample or a known electropherogram and an unknown, and I'll look at it to see how they're consistent. So if they are consistent, they'll say inclusive. If they're not consistent, they'll say exclusive. And if they can't make a decision, they'll say inconclusive. And that usually happens because the quality of the data is not very good, and so they can't make a decision. So one of the, in my opinion, most terrifying, and most important roles of a forensic analyst, regardless of your field, is courtroom testimony. The ability to convey your experience, the science, to a jury of peers who may not have a science background, and allow them to make a decision based on what you tell them is really important, because what you say has the potential to affect the life of someone who is on trial. This takes a lot of time, a lot of practice, and even today, there's still analysts who are not able to do courtroom testimony very well. So it's an ongoing, I don't want to say controversial topic, but this area takes a lot of training, and it's something that is ongoing. You're never going to get expert testimony, but you want to try to be. So typically, what happens is you get a subpoena on a case that you did work on. Usually, it's the DNA analyst that goes to trial, but again, it depends on what the attorneys want. Some attorneys want every analyst who touched a case. Some attorneys just want the DNA analyst. So it really just depends. Sorry, there's some background noise where I am. But once you get a subpoena, you will go to court and you'll have your report with you, and you explain your conclusions. So you'll say, I tested this item, I got this result, and this means blah, blah, blah. And based on what you say, the jury has a decision to make regarding the case. And whatever decision they make is based on what you tell them. And so that has the potential to have, it could really impact someone's life. So that's why I say this part is very terrifying, because I don't like testifying myself, but it's also very important because you're basically educating the courtroom on your work in the science. Another bit of information is, like I mentioned earlier, different labs do different workflows, different processes, different procedures. And so the three main are cradle to the grave is where an analyst takes a case from beginning to end. So they do all the processing for that case. Assembly line is where you'll have a group of analysts who are doing different processes. So like a screener will only screen the evidence, then that evidence moves over to DNA technicians, and they only do the DNA technician work. And then that moves over to the DNA analysts who will do their interpretation. And then you also have batching, where you're processing multiple samples from multiple cases at a time, except for the screener, because they're only opening one item at a time. So different labs do do things differently. I have experience in assembly line and batching, and then labs usually do this for efficiency purposes, especially for high throughput laboratories like Houston. We get a lot of cases at a time. So, and of course, there's backlogs and things like that going on. So they want to process as much as they can at a time. So that's why they use assembly line and batching. But it's going to depend on the laboratory. Another good information to know is that what you learn in one lab is going to be very different from another lab. The science is the same, but how they go about it is going to be very different. So that's something to also keep in mind. And now, with DNA-based forensic services, I do case reviews, consultations, and trainings. So case reviews, we get requests from an attorney to basically look at a case again. Some of the cases are in post-conviction, meaning the defendant or the suspect has already been convicted, found guilty of a crime, and have already been convicted, but maybe up for appeal or something. So the attorney wants us to look at everything just to make sure the science is correct, the laboratory did the work that they should have, and things like that. Sometimes we get cases that are currently in trial, and so we have to do the review really fast. But usually they're post-conviction cases, and usually they're from the defense, which is why a lot of times people say that consultants are on the dark side, because we do work for the defense, but our focus is only on the science and not on anything else. And we also do some training and education. So we'll hold webinars, seminars, things like that. A lot of them are geared towards attorneys to educate them on forensic DNA analysis, how we do our work, and what they should be looking for when they're looking at a case file. And I kind of like to throw this slide in because a lot of people have misconceptions on forensic science, specifically DNA, and what happens on TV and what happens in real life. So really quickly, I kind of go over these, but you'll see a lot of time on TV that they will get a DNA profile and then they'll solve a crime in a commercial break, which is about 2 minutes. That is not the case. It can take at least a week to obtain a DNA profile, but this can depend on the lab's resources and the personnel. I was involved in a case where we were able to get a DNA profile in 3 days, but that involved a lot of overtime, a lot of hard work from a lot of different personnel. And it was a serial assailant, I believe. So they really wanted to get this person, so we had to do it in a very short amount of time. But typically that's not how it works. Forensic personnel do not wear fancy clothes and shoes to crime scenes. It shows it a lot on TV. Crime scenes are messy, so forensic personnel do wear standard uniform that will allow them to move around, to be on their feet for a long period of time, and they will get messy, so allow them to get their clothes messy. Again, different organizations have different types of uniforms, so they may not be in like in a Tyvek suit, they may just have scrubs or something, so it really will depend. And then lastly, TV always shows that police have an active role in what gets tested and how, and they have access to the laboratory. That is not true. Our laboratories, most laboratories have protocols that prevent anyone outside of the laboratory to have access. And this includes detectives and sometimes even management. Only certain people need to have access to the laboratory. And this helps to protect the integrity of the evidence and to ensure that when the evidence goes to court, there's no question about where the evidence was and how it was utilized. And I also like to mention that depending on your background in education, you typically will not have a DNA analyst who's also doing firearms, who's also doing drug analysis, who's also doing document analysis. Usually when you are hired and enrolled as a forensic scientist and you apply just to be a forensic DNA analyst, that's the only role you will ever have, unless you get training and education in another area, but you will only be working in that area. I know a lot of times on shows, it shows that one analyst has expertise in all these different fields, and they're always doing work on cases in all those different fields, and that's not necessarily the case. Maybe for smaller counties or smaller areas that don't have the caseload, that don't have the expertise, they might have something like that, but generally, if you went to school to be a forensic DNA analyst and you are a forensic DNA analyst, that is your job until you decide you want to move over to another field, another area of forensic science, and then you will focus on that exclusively. So I said all of that, but if you are interested, there are some important pieces of information that you should know. Typically, and this is specific to DNA analysis because that's where I have the most experience, but typically you want to have a bachelor's in biology, chemistry, or some type of related field. And you also want to keep in mind that the FBI has 4 courses that they require to be a forensic DNA analysis. So this is where like my pre-med and the minor in chemistry came in handy, because if I tried to apply to a job in forensic DNA with only my bachelor's in forensic science, I probably would not have gotten the job without these additional courses. And so my minor in chemistry and my pre-med status helped me to get the biochemistry and molecular biology to be able to become a DNA analyst. Depending on how you start in the laboratory might help you get those courses in. They might pay for you to take those courses. But if that's your ultimate goal to be a DNA analyst, or if you think that's what you want to do, I would try to incorporate these classes somehow in my college education to ensure that you already have them. Also, if you have no experience in DNA, you would most likely start off as a screener or serologist. That's considered entry level, but again, it depends on the laboratory. And training usually takes about 6 months to a year. Some organizations will train you to do everything, but you only focus on one aspect. Some will train you to do one aspect at a time. So it really depends on organization and what you get hired. But overall, I suggest, and I can't stress this enough, to try to find volunteer internship opportunities or connect with a professional in the field, because that is your ultimate way of getting your foot in the door and also getting advice and guidance and mentorship on forensic, because it's really hard to get into the field, especially right out of school. So it's really important to have some type of experience, whether it's volunteer or internship, under your belt. That would be really helpful. And I also have a list of resources. These are forensic science organizations that have a lot of resources and information. They're different areas of forensic science. So like there's firearms, the medical examiner, toxicology, if anyone's interested in those. The first one, the American Academy of Forensic Sciences, is a really big organization. They cater to all fields of forensic science and have a lot of information on educational programs, internships, jobs, a lot of good resources. And some of these also have good resources for students. So sometimes you can attend conferences for free or very inexpensive. They may provide a lot of good resources for students. So I would definitely, if you're interested, take a look at those. That'd be really helpful to you. And lastly, I think I am ready for questions.
Great. And then it would be great to have you stop screen sharing. That way we can see everybody on the screen. All right. So Jaspi, you want to take over?
Thanks so much, India, for sharing about insightful presentation. So now we'll open up the floor to the audience. If you guys have any questions, feel free to unmute, or you can also let us know in the chat, and we'll be sure to cover your questions as well. Anytime. India, I do have some questions for you. What are some character traits that are important to this industry?
I would say you have to have good critical thinking skills and problem solving skills. Those are really important, especially for I think DNA analysis, because you do a lot of interpretation, but also in the other fields as well. And public speaking is, although testimony and public speaking are not quite the same, but still you're speaking to an audience, so you have to be able to confidently convey the analysis and the science to an audience. So public speaking is really important as well. And you just have to be open-minded and be ready for change, because the field changes very quickly. The science changes very quickly. So you have to be able to just be ready to go with the flow. And also emotional intelligence, because this field can be very, burnout happens really quickly in this field. You're doing a lot of work because, crime is really high right now. So you're doing a lot of work and you could be on your feet for hours. The type of cases you could be working on can be very emotional sometimes. So you have to be able to do your job, but also handle your emotions well. I think those are some good characteristics to have.
Yeah. So what would you say that you like about your profession? What do you not like about your profession? Like, is there something that really annoys you or that really sticks out to you?
I like that no case is the same. And I like that no DNA profile is the same. You can run a DNA profile, one DNA profile, one sample 1,000,000 times, and it'll be different, a little bit different each time. So I really like that aspect of it. What I don't like is testimony. That to me is the hardest part. It's not fun at all, at least not for me. I know some people do enjoy it. I don't like it because I've had several experiences on the stand where defense attorneys are yelling and they're just putting on a big show, but to them it's just a show, but to you, like it can be terrifying. So, but yeah, that's my least favorite aspect of it.
The first one is really stressful.
It is. It can be. It can be.
Um, what is the importance of this industry and profession? Like, what would you say, like, it brings me to the community?
The importance of it is it helps to bring, of course, it has to do because it deals with criminal investigations. It helps to solve crimes, but sometimes it doesn't always solve the crime. So that's important to note, but it does help provide some closure to victims and their families. And it does help to uh, sometimes just help them gain more information on the case. Like I said, you won't solve every case and you won't, you may not be able to provide the information that they're looking for, but you might be able to provide something, whether it's just a DNA profile or whether it's just um, uh, how the person may have died or things like that. But I think just providing information is probably the most important part.
I have a quick question.
Mhm.
So, like, if you could give any advice to your past self, like, what would be something you did differently? And if so, like, what would it be?
I think I would have done more, um, I think internships and volunteering. I really, because of school, like I didn't really think about it at the time. But looking back now, if I would have done more of that, maybe I would have explored other areas of forensic science. But I think the resources that they had then are not what they have now. So now I think there's so many resources for students out there, even in the virtual aspect, but back then they didn't really have that. So I think I would have done more exploring, more internships, more talking to people in the field. I use like TV and books as my way of getting information, but just talking to someone in the field would have been something I would have done differently.
Question, while we're on like the topic of giving advice, what advice would you give to the parents of students who want to pursue like this industry? Like, is there something that they should be looking out for?
That's a good question. I think they should definitely try to support the student in um, looking in different aspects of the field and support them in trying to find volunteer and internship opportunities. And I'll also let them know that sometimes the opportunity will not be where they are located. Sometimes they may have to travel somewhere to get that particular volunteer internship opportunity. So I will definitely let, like the parents to know that. And also to let them know that there's no censoring in the field. Like once you're in the job and you're working, you can be exposed to anything. So, and you never really know what you're going to be exposed to. So just to know that uh, that student has to be open-minded and they have to be able to handle their emotions very well sometimes. But again, it depends on what you're going to be doing. Um, if you're not going to be touching the evidence or have contact with the evidence, then you might not be exposed to it as much. But just keep in mind that that's definitely a possibility.
Yeah. Students, if you guys do have any questions, please go ahead and unmute, or you can let us know in the chat, and we'll make sure to cover them as well.
Adia, did you have a question?
I just want to make a comment. I have a STEM club called 40 STEM Club, and last time our whole club joined aeronautical engineering, and I wanted to say thank you for always giving us these amazing guest speaker sessions with amazing guest speakers. Thank you.
Thanks, Adia. Appreciate it. maybe we'll do maybe just a couple more questions, but if anybody on does have any, please feel free to pipe in and interrupt us as we're asking. Don't feel bad. That's one thing I want you guys to get comfortable with, which is speaking up and asking your questions. There's no bad question. So to Justy and Anita, if you guys want to ask a couple more, one each or something, and then yeah, we'll close it out.
One more question. Did you ever feel like you did not want to pursue this field anymore? Was there like an instance like that? And what like helped you like go past?
Uh, Well, yeah, I think I've had that experience a lot because the Houston lab is a very high throughput lab. So you're doing a lot of cases at a time. You're busy all the time. So at some point, it seems like the work becomes less about the case and more about just the numbers because, of course, management wants to see the numbers. That's important to them. But to us as analysts, the case work was important. So I think there were times when you're just stressed out because all they care about, oh, I got to get this case out. I got to get this case out. We need to have this particular number every month. So there are times when that becomes really frustrating and kind of disheartening as well. But for me, it was just remembering that each case is a person behind it. There's a number associated with the case, but there's also a person behind that case. So just giving your best to the case, even though you have management in the back of you wanting to get their particular number, you have to remember the quality is important and the person associated with that case is important as well. So I always keep that in the back of my mind whenever I'm working.
I had like another question, but what would you consider to be like rewarding from your job? Is there anything in particular you like or like found really rewarding as you were working?
I think it's really hard to say because we're only supposed to be focusing on the science. So the end aspect of it shouldn't really be that important to us as analysts because science should be the only thing. But I think knowing that you did your best in a case and you performed your work with the utmost quality is really important. And that's really satisfying to know. But at the same time, we shouldn't have any personal feelings to the case. We shouldn't want to find who did it for this particular case, but maybe not so much for the next case. We should only be focusing on the science. But still, like knowing that I went in and I did the best I could, and whatever outcome happened is the outcome, but I did the best I could in that case.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I do appreciate all that you do in your organization as well, DNA Mavens. I think your field has turned, the justice system from a very subjective process, which, the more and more we know is the less reliable witnesses are from a visual standpoint, auditory standpoint, anything. And so to now turn a field that is extremely subjective to something that's at least a little more objective and data driven and science driven, I think I am very gracious to you and your group for doing that because it's just there's too many chances for errors in the justice system and it hurts too many people when things aren't right. And so y'all's team's ability to drive it more to science is so critical. And so thank you. And I'm sure that what you all have done have either saved lives or gotten to the truth a little bit more, which in my mind makes a world of difference. So thank you for that.
Yeah, we appreciate that. Yeah, that's what we try to do. It's, I don't know if anyone is familiar with the Innocence Project, but that's where a lot of people are in prison falsely. So they're doing a lot of work to review information, review cases, to release some people who have been falsely imprisoned. And so we do a lot of work with the Innocence Project as well. And we want to do more, but it's, that is the resources are not really there yet. But
Well,
yeah.
definitely share because I think you guys probably just need funding, right? It's probably a funding thing. Yeah, so let us know and we'd be happy to share and maybe we can help support you all because I also very much love the Innocence Project and what they do and their mission. And it's something that that I am so glad exists. And I know they have saved multiple people's lives and gotten people out who've been wrongly imprisoned for 20, 30 years. And that's just crazy to me. So
Mm.
yeah, thank you for working with them, even though I know it pinches on your resources.
It
So
does.
I appreciate that too. All right. So Jasmine, you want to close this out?
Thank you so much everyone for joining today. And we only have a few minutes, but it has been a great presentation and we've definitely learned a lot. Thank you, India, for presenting on forensic science and sharing your experience and also giving this important advice. And thank you everyone for spending some time with us at STEM Week and listening in about forensic science. And we hope to see you guys again in the future for any of our upcoming events. And have a great day.
Thank you. I appreciate it.